Thank you, Karen. Now back to the debate. Shannon Bream has the next round of questions on social issues. Shannon.
Thanks, Brett. Congressman Paul, in 2007, in an interview, you were asked, should gays be allowed to marry? You said, quote, sure, they can do whatever they want and call it whatever they want. Are you advocating legalizing gay marriage in this country?
Well, matter of fact, I spent a whole chapter in a new book I've written on marriage. And I think it's very important, and seeing that I've been married for 53, 54 years now. But I think the government should just be out of it. I think it should be done by the church or private contract, and we shouldn't have this argument, who's married and who isn't married. I have my standards, but I shouldn't have to impose my standards on others. Others have standards, and they have no right to impose their marriage standards on me. And I just don't like it. But if we want to have something to say about marriage, it should be at the state level and not at the federal government. Just get the government out of it. It's one area where it's totally unnecessary, and they've caused more trouble than necessary.
All right. Given that answer, I have to ask you about your defense of the Defense of Marriage Act, which defines marriage as between one man and one woman. Even just weeks ago, you criticized this administration for its decision to no longer defend it against legal challenges.
And the main reason there is the Defense of Marriage Act. And I've been quoted as I voted for it. Of course, I supported it, but I wasn't there. But because that bill actually protects the states. See, I do recognize that the federal government shouldn't tell the states what to do, and the Defense of Marriage Act was really designed to make sure that the states have the privilege of dealing with it, and the federal government can't impose their standards on them.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cain, we'll stay on the topic of DOMA. You have said the administration's decision not to defend it is, quote, a breach of presidential duty bordering on treason. That's some pretty tough language. Isn't this country just moving toward accepting gay marriage?
The Defense of Marriage Act is one of the laws of the land, signed in 1996 by President Bill Clinton. But for the president to give direction to the Justice Department when in his oath of office he says he is supposed to protect and uphold the laws of the United States of America, to me that is asking the Justice Department to not uphold a law.
Thank you, sir. Governor Johnson, most Republicans and everyone else on this stage but you identify themselves as pro-life. You have said that abortion should be legal until the fetus is viable. How do you hope to woo conservative GOP voters here in South Carolina and across the country with that position?
Well, I support a woman's right to choose up until viability of the fetus. As governor of New Mexico, I would have signed a bill banning late-term abortion. I've always favored parental notification. I've always favored counseling. And I've always favored the notion that public funds should not be used for abortion. So running for governor of New Mexico in a state that was 2-to-1 Democrat, I really didn't get that vote in the primary. But I like to think that I got all of those votes in the general election. And that's a reality here also. For those individuals that hold that as their #1 issue, I'm not going to get that vote. I would hope to get that vote if I were to move on to the general election.
All right. Governor Pawlenty, just days ago, a federal court struck down the ban on using federal funds for embryonic stem cell research. You identify yourself as strongly pro-life, but you don't oppose government funding for research on existing stem cell lines already derived from embryos. But isn't that still spending taxpayer money on elements that were generated by, at some point, destroying an embryo?
Well, as to stem cell research, it holds great promise, and I support stem cell research, but I think it should be adult-derived stem cell research. And by the way, Shannon, most of the therapies and breakthroughs that we're seeing in terms of treatments from stem cell research are coming from adult-derived stem cell research, so I strongly support that. As to embryonic stem cell research, I don't think we should pursue that, although President Bush, when he was in office, said that he would allow and authorize the use of research on certain stem cell lines for which the embryo had already previously been destroyed before the issue came to his desk or came to his attention. I did support his approach for that limited window of stem cell research on those existing lines for which the embryo had already been destroyed.
Thank you. Senator Santorum, you're often characterized as the most socially conservative in the GOP field. A man who may join you at some point in the GOP primary, Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels, says Republican candidates should, quote, declare a truce on social issues in the next election. Is he right? Are you willing to tone down your positions on abortion and homosexuality in an effort to reach more voters and to help the GOP coalesce behind a more fiscally focused platform?
I think anybody that would suggest that we call a truce on the moral issues doesn't understand what America is all about. America is a country that is based on this concept, on the Declaration of Independence, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Rights come from God, and the first of which is life, the second of which is liberty. Those two concepts really transformed the world because it said that government was going to be limited, allow people to be free, and to pursue their own dreams, to serve their God and to serve their family and community. That is only possible if we have strong families, and strong marriage is at the root of strong families. And if we have a respect for human life, because of course we're all created equal. And so those founding concepts, what transformed the world in this United States of America was a belief in family, a belief in life, and the belief of dignity of every person. If we abandon that, we have given up on America.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Let's go now to Juan Williams for another round of questions on the important topics of jobs, unions, and education. Juan.
I'm glad you put it that way, Brett, because I think we want to get this debate back to what's the #1 issue for voters in this country, and that's jobs. And I want to do it this time with an emphasis on union jobs. So, Herman Cain, here in South Carolina, as you heard before, the GOP is up in arms over a decision by the General Counsel of the National Labor Relations Board challenging the Boeing Company for moving jobs to a right-to-work state. In Wisconsin, Governor Walker has ended collective bargaining rights for some civil service workers. Mr. Cain, does the GOP risk the perception that it's becoming the union-busting party?
I don't think so, because what the National Labor Relations Board did by citing Boeing about coming to South Carolina is simply outrageous. We have a free market system, and for the government to start picking winners and losers and then trying to decide where those winners should put their business, it's outrageous, and it would upset the balance of how our free market system is supposed to work. One of the biggest problems we have with this country right now today is too much government intervention in trying to tell businesses how to do what they do best, which is create jobs. Government doesn't create jobs. Businesses create jobs. We need to get government out of the way, including trying to tell a company where they should build a new plant.
Congressman Paul, I have the same question for you, sir. But let me add that Republicans have historically had success when appealing to union voters, blue-collar voters. Do you see danger in the GOP alienating union members?
Well, I wouldn't think so, because I think union members believe in the rule of law as well, and you can approach them in other ways. You know, I represented a farm district, and they thought you couldn't be elected if you didn't vote for subsidies, but you reach them in a different manner. But you know, when it comes to jobs, you have to just look where all the jobs are being lost. In Texas, we have a right-to-work state, and we have no income tax and no corporate tax. Where are the jobs coming from? Union states, because the wages are higher. Sure, they made more money when the jobs were there, but now they don't build automobiles and we don't have steel mills anymore. So no, the union wage is an artificial wage mandated by the government under the National Labor Relations Board. The whole thing is unconstitutional. They shouldn't be telling people where to go. The Interstate Commerce Clause should be there to facilitate and allow people to move their businesses back and forth and not to inhibit business decisions.
Governor Pawlenty, when you served as governor of Minnesota, you named an education commissioner who equated the teaching of creationism with the teaching of evolution. Do you equate the teaching of creationism with the teaching of evolution as the basis for what should be taught in our nation's schools? And I ask that in this sense, do you personally equate a faith-based theory with scientific inquiry?
Well, one, the approach we took in Minnesota is to say that there should be room in the curriculum for study of intelligent design. Didn't necessarily need to be in science class. It could be in a comparative theory class. But we didn't decide that at the state level. We left that up to the local school districts and the communities and parents in that area. I think that's a reasonable and appropriate approach. If I might just add something relating to your previous question. You know, I grew up in a meatpacking town, as I mentioned earlier. I was in a union for 7 years. My family is a union family. My brothers and sisters, many of them work in unions to this day, or have worked in unions. And so I understand this issue. We're not against hardworking men and women. They need jobs in this country. What we're against is government intervening in the market and with businesses to the point where they say, we're not even growing jobs anymore because the government's discouraging us so much, making it so expensive, delaying it so often, and we're just out of the job market. And that's the absolute wrong direction. And it's not about bashing unions. It's about being pro-job. And you can't be pro-job and anti-business. That's like being pro-egg and anti-chicken. It doesn't work.
I understand, Governor, but you didn't answer my question about what you believe about teaching creationism in the schools. What do you believe, Governor?
I believe that should be left up to parents and local school districts and not to states or the federal government.
Chris Wallace has the next round of questions. Chris?
My job in this round, gentlemen, is to ask you each about an issue that could be a problem for you down the road in this campaign. Governor Pawlenty, I'm going to start with you. In January, you told me that you signed a bill to promote renewable energy sources, but, and here's the quote, we never did sign a bill relating to cap and trade. Let's look at your record, sir. In 2007, the bill you signed required a task force to recommend how the state could adopt cap and trade. In 2008, you said, I support a reasonable cap and trade system at the federal level, and you made this ad for the Environmental Defense Action Fund. Let's watch, sir.
Do we have to?
If we act now, we can create thousands of new jobs in clean energy industries before our overseas competitors beat us to it. Cap greenhouse gas pollution now.
Governor, I told you it was going to be a problem for you down the line. You now say that that was a dumb mistake, but weren't you, in fact, far more committed to cap and trade over those years than you now let on?
Chris, what I said to you on that day and what I've said many other times is this. We did consider and sign into law legislation in Minnesota that would study cap and trade, but we didn't impose it. We signed up to look at it, to review it, to study it, to join with other states to look at it, and we did. And what I concluded subsequently is it's really a bad idea. And this is not in the last 6 months. I sent a letter to Congress, I think about 2 years ago, and at other times have said, I was wrong, it was a mistake, and I'm sorry. It's ham-fisted, it's going to be harmful to the economy. We all, everybody here and anybody else is going to be running for president, if you've got a, or considering running for president, if you've got a executive position and you've been in the battle, you're going to have some battle scars, or you're going to have a few clunkers in your record. We all do. And that's one of mine. I just admit it. I don't try to duck it, bob it, weave it, try to explain it away. I'm just telling you, I made a mistake. I'm looking American people in the eye and say I made a mistake, and I've opposed that cap and trade approach since. But I think nobody's perfect. If anybody's perfect, come on up here and stand by this podium because we'd like that person to be running for president.
Senator Santorum, Senator Santorum, the last time you ran for office back in 2006, you were defeated by a Democrat by 18 points. You say it was a tough year for Republicans, and in fact it was, but some observers point to your criticism of working women in a book you had written at the time called It Takes a Family, in which you said this: many women find it easier, more professionally gratifying, and certainly more socially affirming to work outside the home. Here, we can thank the influence of radical feminism. Question: have you changed your opinion of why women work?
I wasn't professing as to why women work. I said that what we have is a society that was affirming women outside, and I was making the case they should be affirming women for whatever choice women make. And that's the point I was trying to make. I wasn't saying that we shouldn't be affirming women who are working outside the home, but we should be affirming women's choices as to whether they decide to stay at home and give up careers, as many do willingly, including my wife Karen, because they believe a calling for them to be a wife and a mother. Others who feel, because of many cases, because of financial stress, not, but that they have to go out and work, and I understand that. I respect that. All I'm saying is both decisions should be applauded and affirmed based on the choice the woman wants to make. That's the point I made in the book, and I stand by that choice. And I believe as I said before, the foundational unit of this country is the family, and that we need to have a society that is encouraging and supporting of that basic family structure, and that means to also affirm women who stay at home.
But Senator, why would you link working women to radical feminism?
I wasn't talking about working women to radical feminism. I was talking about radical feminism has, in fact, created an atmosphere where working is affirmed in society and staying at home is not. That's the point I was trying to make. And I was trying to say that both should be affirmed.
Congressman Paul, you say that the federal government should stay out of people's personal habits. You say marijuana, cocaine, even heroin should be legal if states want to permit it. You feel the same about prostitution and gay marriage. Question, sir, why should social conservatives in South Carolina vote for you for president?
Well, they will if they understand my defense of liberty is the defense of their right to practice their religion and say their prayers where they want and practice their life. But if you do not protect liberty across the board, it's a First Amendment type issue. We don't have a First Amendment so that we can talk about the weather. We have the First Amendment so we can say very controversial things. So for people to say that, yes, we have our religious beliefs protected, but people who want to follow something else or a controversial religion, you can't do this. If you have the inconsistency, then you're really not defending liberty. But there are strict rules on freedom of choice of this sort, because you can't hurt other people, you can't defame other people. But yes, you have a right to do things that are very controversial. If not, you're going to end up with government that's going to tell us what we can eat and drink and whatever. You know, it's amazing that we want freedom to pick the future, you know, our future in a spiritual way, but not when it comes to our personal habits.
But Senator, are you suggesting that heroin and prostitution are an exercise of liberty?
Well, you know, I probably never used those words. You put those words someplace, but yes, in essence, if I leave it to the states, it's going to be up to the states. Up until this past century, you know, for over 100 years they were legal. What you're inferring is, you know what? If we legalized heroin tomorrow, everybody's going to use heroin. How many people here would use heroin if it was legal? I bet nobody would put their hand, oh yeah, I need the government to take care of me. I don't want to use heroin, so I need these laws.
I never thought heroin would get applause here in South Carolina. Governor Johnson, you say we should not only legalize and tax marijuana, you admit that you smoked it when it was still illegal in your state of New Mexico after suffering several serious and very painful bone fractures. Question, how far would you go in legalizing drugs, sir?
Well, first of all, I would hope that people, when it comes to the drug issue, looking at me, would look at what I did as governor of New Mexico, which was everything was a cost-benefit analysis. So using that as a criteria, half of what we spend on law enforcement, the courts, and the prisons is drug-related. And to what end? We're arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country. We now have 2.3 million people behind bars in this country. We have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. I would ask people to look at this issue, see if they don't come to the same conclusion that I did, and that is that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related. That's not to discount the problems with use and abuse, but that ought to be the focus. So I advocate legalizing marijuana. Control it, regulate it, tax it. It'll never be legal for kids to smoke pot or buy pot. It'll never be legal to smoke pot or do harm to others. When it comes to all other drugs, I advocate harm reduction strategies, which is simply looking at the drug problem first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue.
Mr. Cain, you've never held office, but you did run for office once. Back in 2004, you lost the Republican Senate primary in Georgia. You got just 26% of the vote. In that campaign, you said your opponent was pro-choice because he would have allowed abortions, pro-choice because he would have allowed abortions in the case of rape and incest. You have an impressive personal history, sir, but why do you have any belief that you stand a chance to win this nomination, let alone the presidency?
A couple of reasons. First of all, the people of the United States are going to elect the person that I believe projects the greatest amount of leadership strength, not the person that has the greatest amount of money, not the person that necessarily has held public office before. And I'm proud of the fact, quite frankly, that I haven't held public office before. Because I ask people, most of the people that are in elective office in Washington, D.C., they have held public office before. How's that working for you? We have a mess. How about sending a problem solver to the White House? How about someone who has a career of defining the right problem, assigning the right priority, surrounding yourself with the right people? If you look at this current administration, it is the worst in current history. And fourth, putting together the plans and then being able to engage the American public in these common sense solutions.
Thank you, sir.
Right now, we'll do a bit of a lightning round. 30 seconds response from each candidate down the row. Depending on the poll, President Obama is getting a bump after the mission to kill Osama bin Laden. Some on the left are now saying President Obama is unbeatable in his re-election effort. Why are those pundits on the left wrong, and what is his biggest vulnerability? Congressman Paul.
His biggest vulnerability will be the economy and high prices. He hasn't dealt with that because he doesn't understand the business cycle, as so many others don't. So the economy will be the big issue. My theory is that people vote from their bellies because it's whether they're hungry or not or have jobs and need things. That's why people vote. And we're in big trouble. Prices are going up. Unemployment is continuing to go up. And we have not had the necessary correction for the financial bubble created by our Federal Reserve System. And until you allow the correction and the liquidation of debt, you can't have growth.
Mr. Cain. Mr. Cain.
President Obama is not unbeatable because one right decision doth not a great president make. He will be, if you look at the economy, he has no policies that are going to turn this economy around. Gasoline prices are going to continue to go up because his administration has done absolutely nothing to help bring down the cost of oil by utilizing our energy resources. So I believe that he is vulnerable in many ways, not to mention all of the broken promises since he's been president of the United States.
Governor Pawlenty.
Brett, we have $4 a gallon gas. This morning they announced they had $6 a gallon gas in Hawaii. We have crushing levels of unemployment that's almost unbearable for so many of our fellow Americans. We got a federal government that is out of control and spiraling towards financial insolvency. And if you look at those facts and say President Obama is unbeatable, I just say respectfully, those polls are wrong. He's got a temporary bump. We can't restore America's promise unless we have a president who keeps his promises to America. And he stood before the American people and said he's going to cut the deficit in half in his first term. He didn't keep that promise either.
Senator Santorum.
I know a little bit about beating unbeatable Democratic incumbents. When I ran for the House, I was up against a Democratic incumbent who had gotten 60% in the every election since his first. I beat him. Second election, I got redistricted into a district that was 72% Democrat against a 22-year incumbent. and he left before he wanted to fight against me, and I won that district. So that's the second incumbent I took out of Congress. The third, 1994, ran against an incumbent who'd just beaten the sitting attorney general by 10 points a couple years before. In a state with over 500,000 more registered Democrats and Republicans, I beat him. 3 Democratic incumbents. You want someone who can beat Democratic incumbents in tough times?
Governor Johnson.
I believe that we're on the verge of a financial collapse unless we balance the federal budget, and I don't see that happening with Obama. Now, I do see that happening with the Republican Party. Why the American electorate is going to give Republicans back control of the presidency and Congress and the Senate, given that a few short years ago they did that and Republicans passed a prescription drug care benefit and ran up record deficits, I'm not so sure. But I'm under the belief that only Republicans are capable of solving the problem that exists right now, which is the collapse of our economy.
When we come back, another lightning round on the potential candidates who are not here. Remember to head to foxnews.com, vote in our online poll on that topic. Plus, we'll wrap up with the closing arguments from each of the candidates here. Stay with us.